Hello, and welcome to the third episode of the In the Company of Stars podcast, where we interview guests on magic, the occult, and related areas of interest. Our guest today is professional talisman maker and Greek Magical Papyri enthusiast, Alison Chicosky. Well, thank you, Allison, for being here today. I've been really looking forward to this. You are an amazing resource for people on Pentacles and the Greek Magical Papyri and so many other things. I think people are really going to like listening to things you have to say today. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we have a couple icebreaker questions that we start off with. And so I want to start with those. This will just kind of help the audience get to know you a little bit and also maybe give us some points to jump off of as we're talking about things. Now, of course, we know each other pretty well. So we've probably talked about some of this stuff before, but it'll be good for listeners to get a chance to hear it.
Sounds good.
So when you were growing up, or maybe once you were an adult, I feel like most people encounter something at some point that lets them know that there's more out there than just the things we see every day or the things that are just part of everyone's normal waking consciousness. And a lot of times that kind of can help stir us to look for magic or look for spirituality, or maybe changes the way we're exploring if we were already exploring. Was there a moment like that for you, or something where you experienced something and you were like, whoa, this is definitely real?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of moments like that in my life. The one that I'm going to talk about, though, is that very soon after I picked up a copy of The Seven Spheres by Rufus Opus, I received some dire news about a relative's health. I performed a ritual and I petitioned for healing. The individual received quality medical care, but the chances of long-term survival were very slim. However, in the wake of the ritual, they regained their health and quality of life. The recovery was so striking, people said it was a miracle. And that had a really big impact on me.
Wow, that is a really great story. And I know you've had a couple healing incidents like that since then. I myself have turned to you before when having difficulties, and so that's a really great one to start with. So now you were working with Rufus Opus's book there. Did that kind of then shape the work you were doing at the time?
It did. It made me more open-minded about what's possible with magic.
And I understand you kind of worked that system a good bit after that. You've recommended it to a lot of people.
Yeah, I still use it.
And so then the work you do now, does Rufus Opus's work influence a lot of that, or do you kind of do that separately, or is it kind of woven through your work in general at this point?
It's kind of separate. A lot of times, the things that I would have been doing a Seven Spheres ritual for are now being replaced by my having already made pentacles to do a lot of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone comes to me and they say, wow, I'm really having some problems with money. I just lost my job. I really need to get another job very quickly. I can just petition the second pentacle of Jupiter on their behalf, as opposed to doing a whole ritual about it.
Okay.
So it's something where I've, I guess, front-loaded the magic. And now that I have these magic items that have been properly consecrated in the right times, I can just keep leveraging them.
I think that's a really useful thing for people to pick up on there. The idea of having things kind of preset to go so that we don't run into that issue where we have to do a whole big ritual setup every time we need something, and so it kind of becomes a roadblock. You've got things set up so you can just kind of grab and go, and that definitely is a good planning element for people approaching magic as a solution for things.
Thank you.
So now, one of the things that we kind of connected on early on in meeting each other and having common is growing up in witch blood families. And so what was that like for you, growing up with witchcraft as a part of you?
I'm going to say that was confusing. Sometimes it was empowering. Sometimes it was scary. But really, it was like living in a different world than everyone else. So when we talk about or when I talk about having a family like that, it just means that my family members had weird talents and abilities, not that they had any answers about why they had them, or what was going on with spirits, or what was going on with me. And I was very glad that when I got into magic, I felt like I was able to start piecing things together.
So as I understand things, kind of like in my experience, some of your early magical instruction was directly from things working with spirits and spirits teaching you things, right?
Yes.
Yep. So what was that transition like, going from having spirits teaching you magic and the magic that you were doing sort of being innate and intuitive to studying magic out of books and learning from other people?
I was really glad to meet competent people to learn from and good books to help me. While I do think it's important to learn directly from spirits, it's amazingly helpful to hear the experiences and advice of other people, um, especially when it relates to things like self-care for your human body after you've done a lot of magic, which might not be the type of thing that a spirit would automatically volunteer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be on a spirit's mind to take care of a body.
Right.
Did you find that things that you were learning from the spirits matched up with things that you were learning from people in books, or was it kind of a different sort of magic or different sort of approach?
It's interesting how it all comes together, because at first things seemed very different, but then the more I studied the Greek Magical Papyri, the more things seemed to come around full circle.
Okay, so that, I guess that answer kind of transitions us well into the next sort of area to talk about, kind of going through finding the PGM and that linking back to your early experiences with spirits and witchcraft growing up. You've kind of become one of the key people in a lot of online communities related to the Greek Magical Papyri. And you also have a background in journeying work as well as in sort of innate or hereditary witchcraft. Does your journeying work or your witchcraft play into your approach to the PGM?
I'm sure that if I didn't have the same background, I wouldn't have been able to jump right into working from the PGM. Oddly enough, some of the experiences with the spirits of the PGM happened a few years before I picked up the PGM. So, not sure how that works, but magic is weird, spirits are weird. However, I wasn't able to put those experiences into context until after I had performed the ritual and then studied up on the syncretic imagery of the time period.
So was it like you were doing other work and you would encounter spirits that you later found had appeared in ways described in the PGM, or was it that these gods or spirits that frequently show up in the PGM started showing up in other work you were doing?
I had in one experience, I had a extremely vivid dream of climbing a tower where I met a winged lion man person.
Mhm.
And then when I later saw that imagery used in the PGM, the statues of the Ion, I just immediately recognized that.
Well, I guess that's a good way of knowing that you kind of found a home, that you were in the right place if you were already encountering those spirits prior to working with that system. So, how did you end up finding the PGM or getting into working with the Greek Magical Papyri?
I was originally drawn to the PGM because the Stele of Jew, the hieroglyphist, came up as a possible way to gain knowledge and conversation with my holy guardian angel. I started asking around, and many of the people I spoke to at the time said that they had only worked a little bit from the book, but that the results they had were excellent. I wanted to see if I could also get excellent results, which turned into the burning desire to unravel the mysteries of the book.
So, you worked with the Stele of Jew for a while at the beginning, and then it kind of like snowballed from there with exploring the rest of it?
So I almost immediately jumped into using the Stele of Jew as daily ritual. And then at the same time, I was also asking friends what their favorite spells were that they tried and looking through the book to see if there were any other viable spells. Um, for those of you who are not familiar with the book, it's a collected text of museum translations. So it's not like a traditional grimoire in that it's not linear, and there's literal holes in some of the original text where they've just been damaged over time, and we don't know what they say in places. So not all of the spells are viable.
So you kind of dove in exploring different spells that people you knew liked or had tried. I guess for listeners, that could be a pretty good approach too. Since you have a lot of experience with the text, are there a couple spells that you particularly like or think are good ones for people to check out?
Absolutely. The spell from the PGM that seems to have the most powerful effect on material success and gain is PGM 4, 1596 to 1715, which is the consecration for all purposes / spell the Helios. But when I do it, usually instead of using it as a consecration, I use the name of a target or myself. So in each case, as you're going through the spell, instead of saying, give glory and favor to this phylactery, say, give glory and honor to him, John Doe, or me, Alison Chicosky, or whatever the name of your target is.
So you're sort of preparing yourself or preparing the target as if they were the talisman, the phylactery there.
Yeah, there's a whole litany of call outs to the different forms of Helios that grant different powers and abilities to the phylactery. Only instead of targeting a phylactery, you're bringing all those blessings to yourself.
So this one's interesting because it's one of the ones that assigns different forms and imageries to different hours of the day. So for people looking at trying to explore systemic cosmology or a systemic approach with the PGM, this starts to build up some of that structural imagery of how time and the spirits relate to each other. So it's one that definitely has some depth to explore. Okay, so that's the spell to Helios. There's a pretty interesting spell. Is there maybe another one or two examples that you would suggest people might check out?
Absolutely. We've spoken in this interview already about the Stele of Jew, the hieroglyphist, which I find to be extremely useful overall. I've been using this formula at the it's the formula that starts it off, but due to the format of the Greek Magical Papyri, the formulas that start things off are usually found at the end, along with the other ritual instruction, as opposed to the beginning. So I've been using that formula that subjects all diamonds to the user to compel inanimate objects to work. So when something is broken, I just do that spell at it and then command it to do its best. According to the thread over in the PGM study and practice group on Facebook, other people have been having amazing success with this as well. And I've used it on the fly to do things like start my car. Extremely useful.
So that's a really, really animist sort of approach to things. I think that's something people kind of note sometimes, is that as magic is moving back towards an animist model, that a lot of times people approach animism when they're doing their magic stuff, but don't look at their lives in an animistic context. And that seems like it's really returning that sort of perception that their spirit's influencing everything on some level to how to view the world.
Yeah, I was surprised at the response I got from folks who were really shocked that I'd even thought of doing it.
But I know from seeing that thread, there were folks that were puzzled by it, but then ended up finding success with it too. So that's a pretty interesting way of going about it. You said you first encountered the Stele of Jew looking at attempting to reach the Holy Guardian Angel, which has been kind of a modern use for it. Traditionally, it has that sort of exorcism element of binding spirits, particularly of removing an afflicting spirit. So it sounds like a lot of your use of it now is more in that, not necessarily the apotropaic exorcism, but exorcism to control and command spirits more than looking for the theurgical approach.
I think it has a lot of different uses. I feel like the ones that are practical might be a little more useful for people. So it's one thing to say, hey, you can do this spell and it puts you in touch with certain forces or aligns you in a certain way or something like that. And quite frankly, when you see a lot of conversations about that spell, even among people who've done it many times, some of them are really hard pressed to describe what that spell does.
Mhm.
So I think that it does do a lot of subtle things that made me better at magic overall. But I also recommend it to people in just hey, here's a way that you can get started. It's a short little thing that you can memorize and you can get immediate results when you might need.
Cool. So that's really similar to Rufus Opus's approach to starting people with Jupiter. The idea of get some good things going in people's lives, give them some success with magic in like meaningful, tangible ways. And so then they're more comfortable being able to explore magic, but they also have a little bit more impetus to do so.
Yes.
Cool. So, all right, is there maybe like one more spell that we could look at that you think is a good one?
Absolutely. The Ouroboros Phylactery, which is PGM 7, 579 to 90. That one is immensely powerful. It's listed as a bodyguard against daimons, against phantasms, against every sickness and suffering. And I've made quite a number of them over the years for other people, and additionally taught a handful of people the same method that I use to make and consecrate them. So the feedback I've received on that makes that phylactery comparable to both the healing and protection.
So yeah, that I think was one of the ones that you were really exploring when you and I first got to know each other and started talking. And I have seen a few other people pick it up and run with it after seeing your success with it. It is definitely a pretty interesting one. And I know you've had a few people who've had some really impressive experiences with it. Do you have anything that comes to mind as far as times where this phylactery has really helped someone?
Yeah, now this is a secondhand story from someone I made it for who reported back this incident. One of the recipients of this phylactery was nearly they were in their car and another car nearly hit them, but as soon as the other car got close to hitting them, they felt this bubble of warmth expand out of their phylactery that they were wearing as a necklace. And the other person's car completely shut off. Like it went dead. It ceased to have power and it ceased moving and it did not hit them.
That
So,
is pretty amazing. I recall you telling me a story about, I think someone, maybe a lineman or an electrical worker, they're on a ladder and the phylactery caught as they were falling and prevented them from falling.
almost. So it was someone who their job was to work on some sort of maintenance type thing. They were professionally climbing a metal ladder to inspect something in the ceiling, and as they were climbing that metal ladder, the phylactery, which was on a long string, got caught up in the rungs of the ladder, and they had to stay there and detangle it. And while this was going on, electricity arced over the pipe that they would have been touching in the ceiling because some wiring had been improperly installed, and it was a hazard that would have electrocuted that person.
Wow. That's one of the things that strikes me a lot with magic is times where it creates some weird little moment that ends up either taking you out from or pushing you into the spot where the magic is basically going to work. Or I guess works by putting you into a moment or taking you out of a moment that either would have been the thing that you needed to be in or needed to not be in based on what the magic was trying to do.
Right.
So you said you've taught other people how to make this phylactery. Obviously, going through the whole process on the podcast is probably a little more than makes sense for people. But are there any like kind of high level tips or things like that you would say people should be aware of when they're attempting to approach that?
Yes, for this particular spell, it's very confusing in that the written part of the spell includes instructions, and then there's a picture, but the picture differs from the instructions. So a lot of people take a look at it and they're not sure whether they should follow the instructions in the text or the instructions in the picture. And in fact, the instructions in the picture, they have holes in them, literal holes in the papyri. So we don't even know all of the letters that were surrounding the Ouroboros. Now, when I make mine, I use the instructions in the text rather than the picture, and the instructions in the text are complete. So that's how I approached it, and I've gotten good results with all of the ones I've made.
That sounds like a very important piece for people to be aware of if they're approaching using that.
Right, and the spell that I mentioned a little earlier about the consecration suitable for all purposes is clearly also suitable as a consecration for things like this Ouroboros Phylactery. So folks should feel free to use that spell to consecrate.
One last kind of follow-up on the phylactery. I know Stephen Skinner talks about how it's necessary for people to use a phylactery when they're using any of the spells in the PGM because you're calling on spirits. And so he sort of looks at it like the Laman or the Pentacles in the Solomonic work, where you have kind of the protective talisman as the barrier when working with the spirits. Would you say this phylactery is one that people could use for that purpose? Or
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the things that I recommend people make right off the bat.
Okay, great. So, well, I hope that people at least experiment with that phylactery, maybe tie it together with the Helios spell, and use that as a jumping off point for exploring some of the stuff in the PGM. It's got some great material in it, and you've definitely done a lot with exposing a lot of that material online for people to dive in and experiment with.
Thank you.
So in addition to those handful of spells that you pointed out and kind of presenting info and experiments in the PGM forums, do you have any projects going on involving the Greek Magical Papyri?
I'm currently working on more durable versions of some of the leaf spells using real leaves that have been electroplated. I've previously glued gold foil to leaves to make them more durable, but those only lasted a few years and then they fell apart anyway.
Okay. Well, that some of the stuff I've seen from the leaf spells you've done have been interesting, and from my own experience, people might not think of like a leaf as like a really potent magical tool, but sometimes some of those leaves that are used in those spells can do pretty amazing things, even just on their own. I had a non-magic friend who now counts me handing him a bay leaf as one of his odd experiences of life, where something happened that he wasn't expecting to happen. That'll be interesting to see what happens with making those more durable and more usable. In addition to your PGM work, you also have recently started an occult jewelry business that seems to be doing really well. I've seen a lot of great testimonies about your work there. I myself have had the opportunity to experience one of your talismans and was really pleased with how potent it was and with how well it worked. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with the practical occult business?
Yeah, so I was fortunate to receive excellent business advice from friends when I got started and a huge amount of support from the occult community. One of the things I think I'm doing differently is collecting and displaying customer feedback on my items, which I've never seen done before for magic items. And while I can't imagine customer feedback on the internet is going to convince a skeptic that magic is real, it will help give folks an idea of how things worked for other customers. Additionally, I try to stay on top of the customer service aspect, mailing orders out very quickly, sending emails with tracking numbers, and resolving post office issues to the customer's satisfaction. I have a lot of repeat customers, and I want to make sure that every order meets expectations. There's a lot of talented practitioners out there, but I think that sometimes the business end overwhelms them. The occult community is full of gossip, and failure to resolve a customer issue can haunt people for years.
Well, I think not just having kind of a focus on good business practice and good customer service, but the idea that you're actively soliciting feedback and using that feedback as kind of a big part of the marketing is great, because I think that's one of the things that people talk about with the people working out of the European Anglosphere sort of magic approaches, is that magic was something that was people's leisure hobby. It was something that kind of was not connected to everyday life, and that the traditions for approaching it that way had kind of died out, and people are picking it back up. And then so there's not the same expectation of results or the same expectation of reliability, whereas if you go to Palero or someone working out of one of the sorcery traditions from down in South or Central America, then magic continued to be part of everybody's daily lives and continued to be a life or death issue. And so there's an expectation that when people are paying for services there, that the magic needs to work. So I think you're kind of bringing that to the game with this, that you're basically saying, hey, I'm going to put this stuff out there, and I trust that it's going to work. I know that it's going to work, and so I want people to actively tell me how it's working, so customers can see, yeah, you're buying something that works. As far as what the business is, can you talk a little bit more about what it is that you're offering people?
Right now, I'm mainly focused on Solomonic pentacles, which are fairly recognizable to occultists, as opposed to the phylacteries of the PGM, even though I've been making PGM phylacteries for years longer than I've been making pentacles. I figured it would just be easier to go with things that people already had a passing familiarity with when I started.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. And so for listeners who haven't seen it, the business goes through the pentacles from the Key of Solomon and makes those available, made under the correct times and prescriptions that the grimoire gives, which I think is kind of interesting, because a lot of the pentacles have been available previously through jewelers that sell things in occult shops, but they haven't necessarily been made as magical items. They're just kind of things that people have had as fashion pieces or things people could buy and consecrate themselves. But you're selling ones that are already consecrated and intended to work.
Right, and that's the difference. I ended up starting a group for amulet makers and collectors on Facebook, so that all the folks that do this sort of thing can all come together and talk about it. And we often have people that come in and say, hey, I got this thing off of eBay or Etsy or whatever, and I would want to make it really strong and powerful. And I'm not sure that they can, maybe, but I know that mine are going to work because I'm doing them, as you said, with the proper timing. I'm conjuring all the spirits and doing the ritual.
So with going through all that, could you walk us a little bit through what that process looks like?
Yeah, I'm leaning heavily on Balthazar's technique. It's like a Solomonic conjure where you have one of the control pentacles as a table of practice, and you've got a candle for the archangel of the planet, and then 4 other candles for other angels. So I'm setting that up. I'm anointing the candles with oil. I am using holy water to wash the pentacle. There's incense, prayers, reciting of psalms that are associated with the pentacles. And then at the end of it, I don't dismiss the spirits right away, but I just let everything go until all of the candles burn down, which is usually several days.
Okay. I know one of the big things for you that I don't know if this has been as common for other cult businesses, but with your focus on customer feedback and showing a history of success with them, you do a lot of testing when you're rolling out new pentacles or making changes in your process. Could you talk a little bit about how you go through your testing process?
Absolutely. So I test my work by making a batch of test items and then giving them to a mix of people. So I try to split that between folks who are talented practitioners themselves and folks that are not magical practitioners at all. I get extremely insightful feedback from other practitioners, and they can communicate with the associated spirits. So sometimes they come back and tell me things I didn't even know about my own pentacles. But it's also important to me that everyone benefits and that I have a good idea of how those benefits may manifest in a person's life. So even if a person doesn't have the ability to interact with spirits, I want them to still be able to benefit from the things that I'm making available. As a current example, I'm getting ready to make and then test the Mercury pentacle from the Veritable Key of Solomon, listed as for success of negotiators, travelers, and students. So one person I have in mind to receive a tester is a practitioner who's currently enrolled in law school.
So I think that's really interesting that you have this kind of quality control element that you've put in place. Again, it really kind of puts us back into that mindset that there's an expectation that the magic should be working and that it should be doing things. I guess as we've seen in some recent discussion online, not all areas of the magical community seem concerned with whether or not magic actually works or does anything. So it's nice to see that as an important element of the business plan.
I would be genuinely horrified if a customer came back to me and said that they received no benefit from one of their purchases.
Outside of the business elements, just because you are, I mean, at this point, you're a professional pentacle maker, and I would say you're definitely leading the charge in how people are looking at making pentacles and making amulets and working with them. And even outside of your business practices, you've recently posted some stuff for how people can do this on their own in order to deal with some of the major issues that are happening these days. You're one of the people that is looked to as an authority on this subject. One of the other authorities on a lot of these magical subjects is Dr. Stephen Skinner. And he's asserted several times that there's no overlap between Solomonic pentacle creation and astrological image magic. Do you find these to be fully separate, or do you find that there's elements where these techniques overlap each other?
I would agree that they're different styles of magic, though I have much less experience with scholastic image magic. I have dabbled a little bit with the pick-a-trick. Image magic talismans require a good knowledge of astrology and usually have a short window of time in which they can be created. They also seem to have spirits inside of them, and you have to be careful with what you do with them as a result of that. Pentacles, on the other hand, can be made on the day, moon phase, and planetary hour. They can also be started in 1 hour of Jupiter, for example, and then finished in a later hour of Jupiter. I consider them to be more like a window to a spirit rather than a home for a spirit.
People talk a little bit about the dangers of astrological talismans when they're elected poorly. Do you feel like the pentacles are a little bit easier to get right or a little bit safer in that regard?
Absolutely. The other thing that is a difference is I hear people with astrological talismans have to be careful based on their natal chart. So if a certain person has their Venus in whatever house, maybe this astrological talisman is a bad choice for that person. And I haven't found that to be the case at all with pentacles.
Okay, so the pentacles are a little bit more universal in their application.
Right.
And now, do you, aside from the basic ones that are prescribed in the text, because the text has, like you mentioned, moon phase, using the planetary hours and the days of the week, it has little timing elements, some of which seem like they might be drawn or influenced by astrological magic, but not nearly as intense. Have you experimented with looking at any astrological timing beyond what the grimoires say?
There's certainly things that are in the grimoires, like the Veritable Key of Solomon, that talks about what sign the moon is in and relates that to making stronger pentacles of certain types. But I've found that they're really strong anyway. So if I can get that extra moon in a sign going on, I will. But if I can't, it doesn't seem to negatively impact it.
Okay. So, in terms of overlapping elements of separate systems, um, does your PGM work and your pentacle work overlap at all, or do they kind of influence each other at all?
Very, very small amount. I think as every practitioner picks up more magic and more skills, they change things a little bit to better suit them. So usually before I do a ritual, I help set the ritual space with intonations of vowels, like you see all over the PGM. And I also additionally leverage the formula we spoke about earlier from the Celia of Jude the Hieroglyphist. But that's just adding a little bit before I then do the other stuff.
So it's kind of like setting your context more than actually changing the ritual approach itself.
Right.
Okay, so you've talked about some pretty great results today as we've gone through looking at some of these different areas of magic. And I think that's one of the really interesting things about talking about magic with you is you are so results oriented, and not just for yourself, but you want everybody else to be exploring magic in ways where they're looking for great results. And that's definitely something that Western magic has missed a little bit in some of the previous decade, but it's nice to see that coming around. When you talk about magic, you often talk about it as being boundless and how it's about making miracles. And again, today you've kind of explained some things that for people were pretty miraculous. Do you have any miraculous goals that you want to accomplish or you want to see other magicians accomplish? Like things where to you they would be pushing the boundaries of what we've seen with magic, but they seem attainable?
Absolutely. My personal stretch goals involve flight or levitation and the ability to manifest material object like you see in tantric lore. So I really love to just, fly up over a crowd and like manifest an apple in my hand or something like that. And I think that would go really far towards convincing people that magic's real.
When you talk about magic, and when you think about magic, and when you think about kind of exposing others to magic, do you feel that having that sense of wonder and immensity, that having that sense that you're holding on to the tools of the miraculous, that helps magicians?
I do. I think that if you don't try for the impossible, you'll never achieve it.
And do you think that there's anything that people can do to kind of keep that sense of that immensity and wonder?
What's really helped me a lot is making friends with other practitioners, yourself included.
Thank you.
They help inspire me and they help keep me mentally balanced because I can talk to them about the amazing weirdness in my life. I think that this path is full of power and reward, but it can and does make people unbalanced because most of us don't live in a culture that makes this path easier. And I think having friends that you can talk to about things like that really helps keep me sane.
Yeah, and I think that's really useful and important. For me, one thing I always tried to do was find magicians who just seemed far advanced or far more successful than me and kind of use them as icons to strive towards being able to be like them or to be able to surpass them. But having like a peer group to be able to share and discuss things with, that seems like that's hugely important too.
Absolutely.
Well, Allison, this was really interesting. And I think we talked about a lot of really great stuff today. Hopefully, listeners enjoy it. Hopefully, they learn some things. And definitely, those of you that are listening, check out Allison's Pentacles and what she's doing with that. Where can people find more about your work? Where can they get access to the Pentacles that you have available? Where can they see things that you're working on with the PGM?
For things related to the PGM, I would really suggest that people join the PGM Study and Practice group on Facebook. It's got some of the best scholar practitioners in the world, as far as I can tell. And everybody there is really amazing. It's also where I've posted a lot of what I like to call PGM experiments, where something works for me, and then I try it a couple times and post it out there for everyone else to try, so I can see if it's just me or if this is really a thing that happens. Additionally, I have a website for my pentacles, which is www.practicaloccult.com. So that's where folks can order pentacles. It's also got a contact me button.
Well, I'll make sure that information goes in the show notes as well. And thank you so much for being here today, Allison. This was really fun and really informative.
Thank you so much for having me.
So our third episode is in the bag. Thank you so much for being here to listen. I hope people had as much fun listening to Alison and I discuss magical papyri and pentacles as we had talking about them. Last year, when I ran into a surprise medical issue, Alison very kindly sent me a talisman, and I immediately saw a change in my situation. I highly recommend acquiring her talismans as a magical solution to issues you encounter. If you want to explore the magical papyri, the PGM Study and Practice group on Facebook is an excellent resource. As for show stuff, our music today was the prelude to Wagner's Parsifal, as performed at the music festival in Beirut in 1927. This is a public domain recording. In the Company of Stars is available through your various favorite podcast outlets, so please subscribe to us there. You can also follow us and subscribe through my YouTube channel, Ararita418. You can follow my rather underused Twitter, @Ararita418, or follow us on the In the Company of Stars Facebook page. We've also started a Ko-Fi page for supporters. We are looking to spend more time creating content, so if you have enjoyed or benefited from the content we're releasing, please show your support. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope you'll be joining us for more explorations of interesting occult topics.